All right, guys, a peek inside SEC football. Allie Peak, TJ Pittinger. Today we are joined by Jake Crain of Crain and Company. Jake, I have not talked to you since the new baby arrived. Well, I've talked to you through social media, but I haven't talked to you in person. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was, I didn't do all the hard work. My job was kind of the fun part in the process. But no, people, they're right when they're like, I can't prepare you for obviously how cool it is and how amazing it is. It's just, it's just trying not to worry too much, every day. She had an ingrown fingernail the other day. And then, she's stuffed up this morning. What do we do? And then you look on the internet and it just scares you to death. So just, figuring it out one day at a time, but it's the coolest thing ever, and she's starting to look more like her mother, thank God. So I think we're all happy about that.
I think biologically babies come out looking like their dad, and that's so that you don't storm out of the hospital.
Yeah. You don't want them, looking like the guy who brings you the coffee every morning. But no, it's nature versus nurture. Nature always wins. Yes. Think Tony Perkins said that.
All right, let's talk some college football. So playoff expansion is looking more and more likely, potentially, 2026 season, right? Is that what we're potentially discussing? What are your thoughts? Do we go to 14? Do we go to 16? Are there some guarantees baked in there for the SEC and the Big Ten?
Well, look, I've always said I thought it should be 8 teams and then have the ability to expand to 10 and then possibly 12. We went from 4 to 12. To me, the cap has to be 16 because once you get past 16, I just don't know how you can, on one hand, advocate for player safety and then on the other hand, add 4 to 6 games to the season. I mean, we see in the NFL, the players, when they talked about adding games to the regular season, they're like, no, I mean, I don't understand how those two things can exist at the same time. But what worries me about the watering down of the regular season, we hear that term, and a lot of times people mean, the games in the regular season aren't going to matter as much. I don't think that's true. I think the games at the end actually matter more, and there's more games that matter more. Even if one of the teams isn't in the playoff hunt, if the other one is, obviously it adds more emphasis to it.
Unless you're Ohio State.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, they made good on getting there. I will give Ryan Day, as kind of cringe and as fake colored as that beard is, that they were able to finish the job. But to me, the watering down of the regular season, once you get past 16, is that you look at the amount of bye weeks that you'd have to keep the same amount of games, the 12 regular season games. I think they would take a regular season game away and say, well, we had 11 regular season games for a long time. We'll just go back to that and add playoff games. And that's not what I want. But as far as the way they're doing it, we're not fixing the main problem. Adding more teams is not fixing the problem. The problem is how we pick the teams, the structure and the metrics that we use to pick the teams. We don't need to sit here and say, well, let's expand and guarantee the SEC 4 and guarantee the Big Ten 4. We just had 12. The SEC got 3, almost 4 with Alabama, and the Big Ten got 4. That's going to happen anyway. We need to take the top 12 teams or the top 14 teams. And if you want automatic qualifiers, it shouldn't be by conference, right? It should be the top 4 conference champion winners of the top 4 conferences, and they shouldn't get an automatic 1 through 4 spot in a bye. I'm fine with that being the automatic qualifiers, but we don't need a group of 5 automatic qualifier. We don't need conference automatic qualifiers unless you win a conference championship game in a top 4 conference. And then if you do that, you don't automatically deserve a 1 seed or a 2 seed or a 3 seed or a 4 seed in a bye, because you can have carryover. Like Oregon finished number 1 in the country and they won the Big Ten. The Big Ten championship game. They're the number 1 seed. They deserve a bye. You should be able to have 2 teams from a conference get a bye if they're good enough. So it's like somebody's having a heart attack and they got a cut on their finger, and the first thing you do is go fix the cut on the finger. That doesn't make any sense. You got to attack the heart attack, attack the main problem. But again, I want what's best for the sport. They're going to try and do what's best for the pocketbook, and that's where we run into these problems.
Allie and I very rarely agree on things, but one thing we do agree on at times is that the playoff expansion, the big argument is, did it devalue the regular season, right? And so I think you can look at it from 2 angles. One, it devalues the regular season from the perspective of the national championship, right? Losses mattered less for national champions. And that's just what we have at this point. But you could look at the angle that says it increased the value of the regular season because Alabama, Oklahoma mattered. Ole Miss, Florida mattered. Games that wouldn't have
Tennessee,
mattered.
Vandy mattered.
Yes, those games did matter more, but from the perspective of a champion, games matter less. And here's what I worry about with the playoff. It feels very much, and what they've talked about is maybe a scheduling agreement between the Big Ten and the SEC, which sounds great. We would love to see Alabama, Ohio State game 1 next year. I'd love to see it as a Florida State fan and not have them come into Tallahassee. But that sounds amazing right now until you realize that those games are essentially just going to be preseason games. If all that matters is your conference record, and that's how we determine who goes to the playoff, then those out-of-conference games that are so exciting to us right now in theory just mean less. And so it's kind of closer to the NFL model of what you do in your division or conference in college matters, but your record out of conference or out of division in the NFL still matters, right? Like the Bucs game against the Bills still matters because your overall record is so important for the playoffs. And so is it better than what we had? Maybe better than what we had, last year in 24. But I worry that those out of conference games that we're going to be so excited about, this scheduling agreement, are just not going to mean very much and just kind of feel like a preseason.
Well, that's why having like metrics that we can look at and say, look, these are the 4 things. And this is where college basketball gets it right.
Like maybe if there was a formula.
Yeah. Again,
things.
If there was a formula, I could even be pissed off about it. I could even be like, well, I don't like the formula, but that is the formula and you show your work. Right? It's like my 8th grade math teacher used to tell me, if you show your work and you're wrong, I may give you half credit, right? But if you don't show your work and you're right, I'm giving you no credit. At least show us the work. Now, the committee, that's a scam. There is metrics. There is a formula. They just don't tell us the formula. And then they tell us they're not going to tell us the formula. David Cohn did a deep dive on this, and he went to the company that actually does it, that actually crunches the numbers, and it's not publicly shared information. We don't know. You just have a bunch of Karens and a bunch of random dudes pretending to watch games. That committee is as real as the cardboard people in the stands watching the games during COVID. It's exactly the same. They're not in there making those decisions. They're not in there talking about, well, their offensive line's better here, so we should put them in. That's not how it works. A formula gets put in and it gets spit out, whatever it is. We just don't know the formula. Dog, just show me the formula. I can be mad about it. That's fine. But at the end of the day, I can say, well, I knew what the numbers were. The team knew what the numbers were. Strength of schedule matters this, that, and the other conference, whatever. But we don't know that. And that's where the conspiracy theories come in. And that's where all the disinformation and misinformation and all this stuff comes into play. And I don't understand. Like, people are still going to watch. Like, nobody's going to be like, well, strength of schedule is only 30%. I'm done with college football. No, you're not. Like, nobody's ever turned off the TV because of that. So I don't get the mechanism and the lack of transparency. It just, it makes no sense to me.
So if there is this super secret formula, does it change, what from week 6, 7, 8, wherever we start talking about it, and then when we go to championship? Because think about Florida State, 2 years ago, they're at the top. They did lose Jordan Travis at some point, in that formula, but they still remained at the top until all of a sudden they weren't at the top. And so that seems weird that it would be the same formula over and over again. Like, does the human element come in there at all?
Well, listen to Allie taking up for Florida State. We need to pause this right now.
Is everybody all right? Like, Allie, do you have your family or something?
All day long, why that team is garbage without him. And I was totally fine with them being left out. But it wasn't consistent all the way through. Like, you can't say it doesn't matter, but then at the last second be like, actually it does matter. Sorry.
Well, and again, that's the problem with lack of transparency. We don't know. It may change each week, but we don't know anything other than what they tell us on their Survivor style TV show where they give the college football team seeds. Again, that's the problem. Even if they came out and said, listen, before the season, all right, and I wouldn't like the way that this would go, but at least I would know for the non-conference, we're going to have these metrics. Once we get into conference, we're going to have these metrics. But there are caveats, right? If your starting quarterback goes down or there's a massive injury or something like that, this is open to interpretation from the human element. Here's how you fix it. To me, it's pretty simple. and it's a 4-pillared formula to me. It's strength of schedule. And that combines conference and non-conference.
Mm-hmm.
It's win-loss record. I think you put in there. I think it's a capped scoring margin. I am fine with that. So that's what, 33, 33, and then you go half cap scoring margin and half human element. Have people in there that know football, right? That have no affiliation with a conference or a network, that can sit down and say, all right, these are how we're ranking the teams. And you put those rankings from those people, almost like an AP poll, but just better. And that should be the formula. So you have a little bit of human element, but it's mostly computers, kind of like society is today.
I wonder too, when we get to the scenario of, take a Florida, for example, right? Started slow this year, finished really well in conference play, especially when we have these non-conference games early. And what if you end up with and maybe this is a stretch, maybe it's not, I don't know, but you end up with like Florida loses to an Ohio State early, and Florida State gets their stuff turned around, and they lose to a Florida State, right? And they're 1-2 out of conference, but then they really get hot, or they get in on a tiebreaker, and you've got like a 7-5 Florida who went, 6-3 in the conference and wasn't great outside of the conference. But then you've got a team in another league that has maybe a better out of conference schedule, but stubs their toe in some conference games. Again, and maybe that's the same point I was making of devaluing the out of conference games. But what if we end up with a 7-5 Florida or a 7-5 Auburn in the playoff here, and then a team that was really good out of conference went a Big Ten team that goes 3-0 against the SEC and doesn't play as well in conference, loses to an Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon, and gets left out? To me, it's just. It just makes games, again, just mean less. And that maybe that scenario specifically is a stretch, but to me that's kind of dumb if we get to that point. We had 3 ACC teams this year, and the ACC is not great. And I'm not going to cap for the ACC ever, as somebody who would love to be out of it tomorrow. But we had 3 ACC teams that I thought all had deserving arguments of being in. And what if that's the case in a certain year, right? Where you could say like, well, yeah, Miami was right on the outside, right behind Bama, looking on the outside, looking in. Should they have had consideration? They were great out of conference. They beat Florida.
But your conference is trash. So like you,
for sure.
you beat Florida first game of the season. But
yeah, but I'm just saying, like in any given year, right? Miami plays out of conference. They play Notre Dame and Florida this year. And so if they win those games, that should, now it will this year, but if they beat Notre Dame and Florida to start this year, like that should mean something.
But if they played in a better conference, it would.
Well, it should. Well, I think both things can be true. Like if you're gonna beat Notre Dame and Florida or whoever, then you ought to be able to have some success in the ACC. If a 7-5 team gets in the playoff, this thing is broken. It's not. Basketball and football are too different to try and do similar things. And it's like in basketball, you can win your conference tournament. You can have the worst record of all time during the regular season, make a run in your conference tournament, win the Summit League in the conference tournament, and you get in the NCAA tournament. We can't do that in football. To me, if I wouldn't mind if they were like, listen, you can't get in the playoff if you don't have at least 9 wins. To me, anything less than 9-3 doesn't deserve to get in. Now, is there a scenario where in the ACC you could have an 8-4 team playing in the conference championship game? I guess, right? And that's probably the limit. I don't think a 5-loss team with the amount of conference games you have to play is going to get into the playoff anyways. But at the end of the day, I think if you're less than 9-3, and look, maybe this is. Again, could an 8-4 team sneak in a 16-team playoff? I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's just gotten to the point where it's like the whole body of work should matter. It should all matter. The non-conference should matter. The conference should matter. And it should all go into the same pot. We shouldn't split this up like, well, they beat this team in the non-conference but they were just okay in an okay conference. It all should matter. And if you put that all in the same formula, I think that's the best way to go about it rather than separating it. And the problem I have this problem with college basketball. Like in college football, a ranked win, it should be at that point in time, right? Like for example, if you're a Florida State and you play Alabama, and Alabama's ranked 12th in the preseason, game 1, and you beat them, and then Alabama goes on to have a horrible year and they finish unranked, that should still count as a ranked win. It's like in college basketball with the quad system. If I beat somebody at the beginning of the year and it's a quad 1 win, and they have a bad conference season and they drop into quad 2, that should still count as a quad 1 win, because at the time I beat them, they were ranked. At the time I beat them, they were in the quad 1. So I just, there's a couple things I think we need to fix. But as far as separating the non-conference and conference, I think it should all go into the same formula, which is strength of schedule, win-loss record, have the human element rankings, and a cap scoring margin for tiebreakers. That's what I think we should have.